Minutes.
We have as the first order of business the minutes of the meeting held on the Wednesday, the 24th of October, 2018. Minutes for the 7th of November, 2018. And minutes for the 21st of November, 2018 to be confirmed. They have been distributed?
Yeah, this to be confirmed.
We have a motion for the confirmation.
Yeah, you just say, if there are no amendments to staff. If there are no,
Indicate that the minutes have been circulated.
if there are no,
I'm advised that the minutes have been circulated for the 3 days indicated, and if there are no objections, can we have a resolution that they be confirmed?
Mr. President, I beg to move that the minutes be confirmed.
No second for that.
no second.
Yes. The question is that the minutes for the 3 days mentioned be now confirmed. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
There is no communication from the Governor General, but I have noticed of lateness from the following senators. Senator Tony Moore, she has indicated that she will be here, but late today. Senator Monique Tate, an indication to like effect, and Senator Lynette Holder as well. They've all indicated that they will be late. But I am to advise that Senator Crystal Haynes is traveling on Senate-related business and will be absent, and also Senator Lynette Holder has indicated that she too will be absent. I think I've indicated all. Yes, and the leader of government business with us, our Senator Dr. Jerome Walcott. He too is traveling on Senate-related business and will not be here. Yeah, I mentioned him earlier. Yeah, I indicated to her that she will be. Yes. Senator Crystal Drakes has indicated that she is not at her best, and we may or may not see her. Hope she is at her best very shortly, but in all likelihood she may not be with us today.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I'm commanded to lay the following documents: the white paper on planning law reform, the road traffic registration fees, Order 2018, 2017 annual report and financial statements of the Central Bank of Barbados, duties, taxes, and other payments, exemptions, Horace Beckles Order 2018, and the audited financial statements of the Child Care Board for the year ended March 31st, 2017.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries. Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate and moved by a minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the suspension of Standing Order 45-2 to enable us to deal with the bills in all its stages today be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Point of order, sir. I have complained almost every time I come to the Senate about getting late notice because I didn't know what we were discussing. I only found out yesterday what we were actually discussing. And that's after I've sent emails asking what we are going to discuss today. We have at least 30 pieces of legislation floating around the place that I must be prepared to deal with anyone when we come here. I can't do that. There's so many bills we get from the House, but I do not know which one is coming at any particular time. To move the standing orders, to move that the standing order be suspended to facilitate, I don't know which one they're going to facilitate today.
Well, it was indicated for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I only found out yesterday, as I said, or last.
45-2, I'm sorry, 45-2.
I mean which bills? Sir? So what I said on point of order is that resolution is out of order, that motion is out of order, in that the House, this House did not get notice of it, and there was no one, and there was no person seeking leave of the President to suspend the standing orders. In accordance to Standing Order 74, it says, any one of these standing orders may, after notice, or with leave of the President, be suspended on a motion made by a senator at any sitting. We had no notice. No, it says here anything. And after notice. No, it says after notice. It says here in standing orders. You must have notice. Suspension of the standing orders must get notice. We did not have any notice, and I say that this particular motion to have the standing order suspended for today's sitting is out of order.
Because if you look at the order paper for today, Wednesday, the 12th of December, 2018, you will see at page 10. Several of the measures being proposed to be dealt with today, notice was given.
Notice of the standing order.
28th of November. In at least two circumstances.
Sir, I'm not talking about notice of the bill. I'm talking about notice of the suspension of the standing order. This is what section standing order number 74 speaks to. It says suspension of standing order. And it says any one or more of these standing orders may, after notice or with leave of the President, be suspended on a motion by a senator at any sitting. We had no notice that you wanted to suspend these standing orders, and that's what I'm saying. And there was no application for leave, so that particular motion is out of order. Because it says in the standing orders, I didn't write them.
A lot, Senator, will depend on how much support you can muster for your position.
If you read that standing order, it says, if it says that the President gives the standing order, that you refer. If he's taking that notice with you, that this is notice now. It didn't say when notice has to be given. Notice is no go.
Yeah.
Just make a move on and let's get it. Make a move on and let's get it.
Senator, I attract your attention to Standing Order 74. Any one or more of these standing orders may, after notice or with the leave of the President, be suspended on a motion made by a senator at any sitting. A motion under this order shall be decided without amendment or debate. It is the view of the chair that allows these matters called for, as a lot more that will come before us for soon attention, immediate attention. To that extent, I'm expressing my own position, giving leave for these matters to be proceeded with today. Pardon?
No one applied for leave.
The standing order, so anybody has to apply for me to leave. I appreciate the circumstances in which the matters before us.
With the leave of the President.
With the leave of the President. And the President hereby gives leave. That's all I'm indicating. Have I misread 74?
Is the notice or with the leave of
I think misinterpret, but more like it. It says you are intervening in the debate and you are intervening in the procedure. You are supposed to guide the procedures, and as such, you are putting yourself in a position where now you are getting into the in the procedures. You, sir, your duty here is to protect the minority, the most important duty, because the majority can take care of itself. The minority here is being oppressed, and sir, with all due respect, you are contributing to that oppression. You know, I'm very sorry that I have to say so, but that is what it appears to me. We cannot allow the Senate to be abused like this every time. I asked for the whole week, what are we debating on Wednesday? Nobody can tell me. I sent email to the leader of the Senate. I only found out yesterday that we can what we are going to be debating. You know, it's unfair. I have 30 bills that came from the House. I don't know which one you're coming with. And so they come in here, then you expect me now to be ready with half a day's notice. I'm not no day's notice at all. It is unfair. And I'm saying, sir, that what you're doing, sir, now is contributing to the oppression of the minority in the Senate.
To my position, I again repeat the wording of section of Standing Order 74. It says any one or more of these standing orders may, after notice, or with the leave of the President, be suspended. And all I've indicated in accordance with the provision of section of Standing Order 74 is that the President hereby gives leave for the matters to be proceeded with.
or with the leave of the President?
I'm acting fully within my competence as provided for in Standing Order 74.
Let's go ahead.
Let's proceed.
So you are moving that Standing Order suspending all honorable members. Standing Order 450.
President, if I may add my voice to the, hopefully a resolution, Mr. President, sir?
Yes.
With your indulgence. I think, Mr. President, that one, the standing orders forbid any debate on this issue. I think, Mr. President, it is within your powers to grant leave whether or not an application is made for leave. And as you're Mr. President, I'm sure you'll be familiar with sometimes you have an inherent power to do certain acts. So if, Mr. President, you have determined that there is leave for the motion can proceed.
And let me just indicate that the position which the chair has taken is further buttressed by Standing Order 23, exemptions from notice. It reads as follows: unless the standing orders otherwise provide, notice shall be given of any motion which it is proposed to make, with the exception of the following: a motion for the amendment of any motion, a motion for the adjournment of the Senate, and of particular relevance, a motion for the suspension of standing orders put with the leave of the President. So the position that I've taken is further buttressed by Standing Order 23D.
The question is up for phase 2. Will you suspend the previous meeting?
The question before us is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the balance of the day's sitting. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following bills be read a first time.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the following bills be read a first time. The Income Tax Amendment and Validation Bill 2018, the Fuel Tax Bill 2018, and the Central Bank of Barbados Amendment Number Bill 2018.
The question is that the three mentioned bills be now read a first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Public business. Order number 4. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve, in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the Crown, situate at Cloughs in the parish of St. Lucie in this island, for the Sites and Service project.
Mr. President, I rise to lead off debate on this resolution of the vesting of the lands at Cloughs St. Lucie, totaling a little over 8,000 square meters. These lands are on a verge which is part of a public road leading to Roaches on one side and to St. Swithin's on the other, in the other direction. The land is being acquired for low-income housing development. A portion of this land was previously sold under the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, and we're now seeking to have these lands vested in the National Housing Corporation as described in the schedule to this resolution. As you will be aware, Mr. President, housing is always a priority here in Barbados for individuals, especially low-income housing. Many people are seeking to find their own, as we say, piece of this rock. And this will give an opportunity to many, many Barbadians who would have otherwise difficulties in getting housing, access to housing at an affordable price. This housing development would certainly be one such at an affordable price, and not perhaps like some previous low-income housing developments that we were told would have been at a low price and turned out to not even be within the reach of people in the middle income bracket, much less low income housing. So it's important that this parcel of land be vested in National Housing Corporation so we can achieve this endeavor that Barbadians who would like to have their own home have this opportunity. Furthermore, St. Lucie in the northern part of the island is certainly a part of the island that we would like to see have more and more development. And certainly the land available down there would be extremely suitable in one, providing housing to individuals so that they would have their own homes, but also two, to help to bring further activity, further development, and further expansion of Barbados's endeavors to ensure that the whole island continues to develop at the same rate. And certainly we would hope that this parcel of land, once vested in National Housing Corporation, will do such. Mr. President, housing, not just in Barbados, but all over the world, is seen as a priority for individuals. Oftentimes we forget that there are many people living in conditions where they are in extremely cramped situations, where they're looking for an opportunity to move out of such situations, but certainly finances always plays a part. So low-income housing then becomes a solution to this type of issue and problem. And we believe that this particular parcel of land will help to alleviate some of the much needed housing solutions that Barbados requires at this point in time. And with that, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Make a move by the resolution, no problem.
Yeah. Mr. President, I beg to move that the resolution be now passed.
Question is?
Any other speakers?
Any other speakers?
Sir. I was expecting Senator Franklin to, usually this is the position he speaks to or speaks at, but I want to make a small contribution to the debate, Mr. President, and in making the small contribution which I propose to make, there are just about 3 observations that I would like to make this morning. I am something of a politician. And indeed, sir, if I wanted to be really political on this matter, I would, as a politician, rise and I would speak to the loyalty of the people of St. Lucie to a particular party over the years. Firm support for as long as I can remember. Indeed, sir, I do recall that it was St. Lucie, along with St. John, that somewhere around 1999 or so, they withstood a storm when the people of Barbados attempted to do what they finally got to do in 2018. Those two were able to hold on during that storm, St. Lucie and St. John. I don't want to be political, and therefore I'm not going to speak to that. Indeed, sir, if I really wanted to be political, I would actually speak of a time in 2009 or thereabouts when the representatives from those said 2 parishes, St. Lucie and St. John, they had a memorable photo shot not far away from where this resolution pertains, in Cloughs, not far away from at a place called Pickering. And there the people of St. Lucie began to dance, because they were told that right there at Pickering they were going to have the largest shopping complex, they were going to have a post office, a library, they were going to have everything at Pickering, only to find out later on that that was just another empty promise. But I do not want to be political, and I'm not going to mention those things. St. Lucie, over the years, have got very little, if anything, for their loyalty. Now, they were able to withstand, as I said, that storm, but neither St. Lucie nor St. John were able to withstand the tsunami. Now, I live at one end of this island, and St. Lucie happens to be at the other end. But I know this area at Cloughs. I know it well. Indeed, right beside Cloughs is another district. That district is called Greenwiches. You hear the name, sir? That district, I repeat, is called Greenwiches, right alongside Cloughs, right alongside the same area. Yes, yes. So I know the area. And I know of all the people, the Hines family, the Cadogan family, the Brooms family, and so on from that area. I know too, as was mentioned by the leader of the House this morning, that quite a few people in that area, the Cloughs area, they benefited tremendously from the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. There were a plantation community, and when that particular act was formed, they benefited tremendously, those families in St. Lucie. Now, sir, I have traveled throughout the Caribbean, and this is the real gist of my submission, the first point that I really want to hit. I have traveled throughout the Caribbean, and I would want to say, sir, that this country of ours, pound for pound, indeed, sir, house for house, in my opinion, as I go through the Caribbean, this house has the best housing stock in the region. Not an idle boast. I was around for a long time. In fact, I think only yourself and would be, sir, around longer in this Senate, this chamber, than I've been. And I was around in the days of Hurricane Janet, 1955. I make bold to say today, sir, that if a hurricane of the strength and the magnitude of Hurricane Janet had to hit Barbados today, it would not do the type of damage which it did in those days. I do not live, sir, in any heights. I don't live in any gardens or terrace or park. I live in a little district called Marleyville. And sir, that's the same district in which I lived during the time of Hurricane Janet. A little village, and that too, like Cloughs, was partly owned by the plantation. And in my district in those days, nearly every house in that district suffered significant damage. Nearly every single one. I couldn't even remember, as I was trying to jog my memory just now, of anyone that wasn't damaged. The majority of the houses slipped off the prop. and some of them were blown completely off the prop. And I know the young folks in this chamber may want to know what I mean when I say props, because their idea of a prop today is something that you take on stage to enhance your performance. But the prop is really, then you have what we would call in those days the soft stone, and you put your house frame on it. And very often the wind got under there and threw the house very high, or just blew it right off the prop. And I don't see that type of thing today. The fact of the matter is that the owners of those houses around the time of Hurricane Janet, they could only build wooden houses because the land was not theirs. The land belonged to the plantation. All of this has changed, Mr. President, but is now changed by the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act, which allowed those who occupied the land to buy the land at 10 cents per square foot. In that district of Marleyville now, you can hardly find a wooden house. You can hardly find a single wooden house. Indeed, throughout Barbados, quite a few thousand qualified tenants have been able to buy the properties and improve the properties tremendously. And they've built some strong, beautiful homes thanks to the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. Even more importantly, those people have been making their wills. Some of them have passed, yes. Their children are now inheriting land which once before wasn't theirs, didn't belong to their family. And so the housing stock has improved. Again, I emphasize, thanks to the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. And over the years, this country of ours, Barbados, we have benefited from certain bits of legislation and certain pieces of social engineering which can only be described as revolutionary. Adult suffrage, we had free secondary education, and I make it bold to say today that up there alongside them, I rate the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. I rate it very, very highly. It is right up there with them. And it has never been given the recognition or the acclamation which is due to it. And Mr. President, if you go back and you read the debate on this piece of legislation, you would realize that certain politicians of the day spoke against it, which is so surprising. Certain politicians did speak against the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act. And one of the things, if you look at the newspapers, look at so on, it appears to me, I can't say for certain, that no real criticism of it, that government was excuse me, Mr. President, a government was taking away the land, no real criticism seemed to have come from the plantation owners. You had some of the politicians saying, but not the plantation owners. And so, sir, I believe that the proponents of reparations must have been extremely pleased with when this particular piece of legislation was passed. I believe that today it is the closest that we have come to making amends for what our foreparents went through. So it is therefore my submission, Mr. President, that the Tenantries Freehold Purchase Act has made a tremendous contribution to the housing infrastructure of Barbados, allowing people to buy the land and then building the stronger home on the parcel of land. It is an extraordinary piece of legislation, and it is revolutionary in every respect. That, sir, is my first point. I said I wanted to make 3. The second point I want to make, sir, is this, that as I drive around, I am realizing day by day that there are too many dilapidated houses in a small island like Barbados. We have too many dilapidated houses in this small country of ours. You drive along, coming to work, and you drive and come, let's say, down from Jackson, and look left and look right, and you'll notice the number of houses. Drive along Bank Hall, drive along Bush Hall, drive coming down Belmont Road. The number of houses where nobody lives at them, there's bush virtually coming through the windows, and so on. And if you doubt me, just tomorrow, as you drive along, take a look out through the windows, and you'll see precisely what I mean. And quite a few of those old and dilapidated houses, there are houses from the 1940s and the 1950s, and houses which were built some 60 and some 70 years ago. You can say that because of the style, with the jealousy windows and the verandas and so on. You can say, without any doubt, built in the 40s and the 50s. And those were the houses which indeed were the envy of their day. Now, it is sad to say that some of them have become derelict and very unsightly. As I said, there are trees literally climbing through their windows. Very unsightly to the locals and very unsightly to the visitors. Some of them don't have windows at all. Some of them don't have doors at all. And there's bush all around them. Nobody cleans the surroundings. Some are haven for paros, a hideout for people for criminal activity. And one dilapidated house in a district, Mr. President, can affect the entire neighborhood. It was drawn to my attention quite recently, Mr. President, that a number of persons have made wills leaving house and land to a particular relative. And the relative doesn't really know that something has been left for him or her. Excuse me. Yes, some of them are living abroad. Now, in some cases, persons who made those wills have died. And the beneficiary under the will, that beneficiary has also died. And it would surprise you, I'm sure it would surprise some people here, not so much you, Mr. President, because knowing the type of work that you have done over the years, you would know that in our registry right here in Barbados, there are hundreds of wills made in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, which are still there in the registry unopened. Unopened. Nobody knew that they were there. And some people don't even seem to realize that when someone dies, you check to see if the person has made a will. Nobody, there's a pile of wills at the registration office. People don't follow, and then the property runs to ruin. You may be surprised to know, Mr. President, that some names that appear on the land tax bills that come up for some of these properties, for some of these dilapidated houses, some of those people have died 50 years ago, and you still see their names appearing on the land tax bill. They have died 50 years ago. And what are we supposed to do in Barbados? Drive around and look at those properties for another 50 years? I believe, sir, that there is need for us to launch a campaign against these dilapidated and unsightly buildings. It is my firm belief that a committee should be set up to establish and to facilitate the process. And I mean officials from places such as the Land Tax Department, from the Land Registry, from the Court Registry, from the Ministry of Housing, and of course some knowledgeable individuals as well to sit on the committee. But something has to be done about it. Because, sir, all government gains from these derelict buildings is a bad image. No taxes are being paid by them in many instances. Near to where I work, across the road, there was a building. And I know the people of that firm, they were very interested in the property, this house, over on the other side. And when they made a check, they realized that the land tax bill was going overseas to this person by name. And so what they did to show their interest of and their intent to purchase the land, they wrote to the person overseas, only to find that the letter came back stamped in the corner, deceased. And that was the end of their inquiry. Common thing. Came back with a stamp, deceased. But the house is still there. And I'm saying, sir, that that should not have been the end of the matter. Because it's still there, and it will be still there next year and the year after, and so on. But again, I say that government should move swiftly. And government should give notices to the owners or to the persons who have interest in those properties and ask them to come forward by a certain time in order to prevent acquisition of the property. And sir, if nobody comes forward, government should be able to take action. And I mean action such as vesting the property in national housing, selling the property for the arrears of taxes, and so on. To remove the eyesores, as you were saying, Mr. President. You know, there are some, government could even sell this land, these properties, to middle-income earners, as the occasion demands, because it could be someone not necessarily middle income, but sell the land. Find something to do with the property rather than let in a small country like Barbados all of these house spots there with dilapidated houses remain as eyesores. I don't think so that we'll have to change the Constitution to do something like that. Don't think so at all. The point is that government must not be scared to act. And truth be told, in doing this, government is not going to be offending anybody, just making the island more pleasing to the eye. I believe so that if we have to take some harsh decisions in Barbados to make this place a better place, then we should do so. Sir, the final point, remember I said I wanted to make 3. There's only number 2. The third one I'm going to make very quickly. And it is almost akin to the first point which I made about the second point which I made about the properties. Many Barbadians left this island in droves in the 1950s, and subsequently too. They left. The real brunt of them went over on a boat called the Francasi and another one called the Sorrento. The Sorrento. Only the old boys didn't know about that. Yeah, the Francasi and the Sorrento. And they left and they went to England. And sir, when they left this country, they had one dream. I am going to leave Barbados. I'm going to go to England. I am going to work out there. Whether I work in the London transport, whether I work in the factory, I'm going to work. But the one thing I'm going to do, send back home some money to build a house. And they say, and then I'm going to go back home and live in that house and die in Barbados. Because that is what their aim and their dream was. And their dreams came true. A lot of returning nationals came, they built the house, and sad to say, many of them have no past. But sir, that is where the problem is. That is where the problem is, of which I now spend the last minute of my submission. There are houses in Ruby Park. There are houses in Mangrove. There are houses in Fortescue, which these people have built. The problem is, now that they've gone, hey, look, they had children in England. They had children in England. The children were born in England, went to school in England. They are working in England. They grew up there. All of their friends are in England. So they went to the parties, everything in England. And they only used to come to Barbados to see the parents. That was the connection. Now the parents have died and the house belonged to the children in England. Now, that is where the problem is. Those children have no interest whatsoever. I speak from experience. I know who I'm talking about. I can go and take you now to show you a house here, a house there, a house there, where nobody's living it because the two parents, they've died, and the child is overseas. And it belongs to the child. But the child has no desire whatsoever to visit Barbados anymore, to look after the house or anything of the sort. They have no urge even to sell the land. You tell them, what about selling it? And they shake off that question like water off a duck's back. Have no interest whatsoever. Because you know something? The sacrifice was not theirs. The sacrifice was the parents' sacrifice. Was the parents. There is no urgent need by those children to recoup any expenditure or anything of the sort. And so, those houses remain unattended. These houses right now, they are not like the dilapidated houses that I spoke about. These houses are not in bad shape. They are not in bad shape. They're not dilapidated whatsoever. But it is a problem which sooner or later we are going to have to face. It's a problem which already has raised its ugly head, and it will be a big problem for us in years to come. With those words, Mr. President, I am obliged and I support the resolution to assist the people in Crofts with their low-income housing. I am obliged to you, sir.
Good morning, Mr. President. I too rise to lend my support to this resolution on housing, affordable housing on land, affordable land. I agree with both senators when they said that it is the dream of most persons, and certainly most Barbadians, to own a piece of the rock. And this is a fact that is clear when you speak of persons traveling to the United States and to Europe for 20, 30 years with one, being motivated by one dream, and that is to at some point return to this island, or the island of their birth, or the country of their birth, and build a house. That's how important the land is to people in this country. But this morning I want to speak specifically about affordable housing, owning your own house, owning your own home, and the effect that that has on you as an individual, as a parent, and also as a child growing up in that home. A home does not only satisfy one of the basic human needs, and we know those needs are food, clothing, and shelter. It does not only satisfy those needs, but it provides, I love, yes, yes. A house is made of bricks and stones, but a home made of love alone. It is true. Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. But it provides the occupants with a sense of well-being. A sense of well-being. I'm going to speak to the effect on the child first, because I've had more experience with children as a teacher in a former life. And as teachers, we can tell almost immediately when a child comes from a home that's disrupted by constant moving around. And there's evidence to suggest that when a child is in a house where there's no stability, where parents are moving from one location to the next, because in many cases they can't afford maybe the rent, or they're scotching up, as we say in Barbados, scotching up a relative's home, they cannot sometimes dedicate the amount of time to the children's work and such like. And you see the evidence of that. And that instability also impacts the child. So the child is unsettled in the classroom. The child is uncomfortable in the classroom. The child is distracted. So we see the importance of a comfortable home for children if you want to see learning outcomes that are satisfactory. So you have that impact. So it's important that a person has some place stable to raise their family if they expect, in many cases, for their child to excel. Also, you can see it in the workplace. Now we know, and we in here can agree, that a house is one of the biggest investments that you will make. One of the biggest investments. If you can't afford your home, or you can't afford the property that you are building that home on, that brings a certain amount of stress into your life. So you have that impacting your well-being as well. So sometimes it may manifest itself as mental stress. You're at work, you're studying, the rent, you're studying how you're gonna pay for the property that you would like to build your house on. These are things that impact a person's ability to function. Your inability to leave your parents' home at a certain age, if you're a man especially, in this country, you you want to marry and move on if your life is extremely difficult. I would advise any young man who is thinking of getting married to consider living in your parents' home, or the home of your wife's parents. It's even worse. Yeah. No, these are things that you have that you have to consider when you're when you're thinking about moving ahead in life. But yes, as I said, the stress of not being able to own your own home, buy land, it has a knock-down effect, and it affects you in the workplace in terms of your ability to be productive as a worker. It affects you in terms of absenteeism, because persons sometimes, because they have to deal with matters in the house or deal with matters around the home, find themselves away from the workplace. So that's another problem. And these things tend to dissipate over time. They can speak certainly for children in the classroom. When you have that stable environment, you have that stable community, then you can be more focused on your schoolwork. And guidance counselors will tell you, when children come to them complaining about why they can't focus, it's usually because of problems at home. And problems may manifest themselves in ways that you can see there's conflict in the house because persons are not comfortable where they are. 3, 4 people scotch up in one room, in one bedroom. Yes, we would have had some of that growing up. Yeah? Crowded into one space. Yes? And I'm being modest with my numbers because I've seen cases where you have 11 persons living in one house. 11 up to 15 persons living in one house. Yes? And primarily because persons cannot afford to move out. Many of the older children cannot afford to move out. This resolution will provide an avenue for persons like that who may not have a lot of money to play with, but they want something too as well, so they can afford property at rates that the average man can afford, and buy a piece of land and build a house. And what we've been seeing in Barbados, especially over the last 10 years, is what I refer to as gentrification of many of our rural communities. Coming from a rural community myself, St. Andrew, we've seen evidence of that in St. Andrew, where persons are displaced from communities and lands that were earmarked for persons were commercialized and put out the reach of the average person. So we have a situation here where we are more or less bringing some balance back to the table, where we are making provisions for people who can ill afford to buy land in some of the other residential areas that are coming on stream. You're seeing land selling at what $75 per square foot, and all kinds of ridiculous prices that most persons are able to afford. So, and that brings me to my final point. I'm going to be short on this. The whole idea of staying. This will speak mainly to persons within that parish, St. Lucie. Sometimes persons want to stay within the parish. They don't want to dwell so far. If you grew up in St. Philip, like good Senator Greenwich, you don't want necessarily to move too far down into St. Thomas or maybe St. James or St. Andrew, St. Lucie. You know, sometimes you want to stay within that particular parish. And I believe this resolution will provide another avenue for persons to stay right close to home and build out the communities that surround those areas. So Greenwich Village, Greenwiches, thank you, with persons living in that community would benefit from a resolution such as this. Of course, there will be other persons who will come in from outside who will also benefit. But I speak especially to the expansion of the community, the building out of the community, which is one of the things that we would want to promote on this side. So with those few words, I just want to say that I support this resolution. I support any move towards making provisions for persons who would not otherwise be able to benefit from ownership of property in this country. We know that property here, in many cases, the premium is becoming expensive, but we still have to make way for persons so that to fulfill that dream. There's an American dream and there's a Barbadian dream. This is the Barbadian dream. And I'm sure most persons will agree with me. The Barbadian dream is to own your own land. And if you own your own land, you can build your house. You can build your own house and you can make a comfortable and happy life here in this country. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you, Senator Springer. I next recognize Senator Lisa Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I too wish to lend my voice to this bill and to join my colleagues who are expressing their support for the passage of this particular, these two resolutions, vesting land at Chancery Lane and at Capstan St. Lucie. Mr. President, I know my colleagues have spoken about the Land Tenantry Act, which would have been passed, and we have had a valuable contribution about the importance of ensuring housing is supportive of our nation's children. I want to speak, Mr. President, today about the question of the right to adequate housing in the context of this resolution. Mr. President, in 1948, when the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, one of the key points which was raised was the right to adequate housing. And Mr. President, at that time, one of the things which was raised in that context was the importance of ensuring that all citizens in all nations had access to adequate housing. Adequate housing had certain definitions, Mr. President, and it talked about ensuring a couple of key things. One, security of tenure. Two, the availability of services, materials, facilities, and infrastructure. Affordability, and I'm going to come back to the question of affordability in a minute. Habitability, people needed to be able to live. Accessibility, Mr. President, and location. And when we talk about location, we're talking about housing not only as a physical space where people live, but where people also have access to employment opportunity, social services, child care, and other social facilities. These are the rights that the United Nations in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights would have spoken to when it spoke about the question of adequate housing, but equally so when UN Habitat also started to develop protocols around the question of what is adequate housing. Mr. President, having put that in context, the United Nations then went on to speak about adequate provisions being made for persons who fell into vulnerable groups. Women. We know that much of our housing stock, many of our persons who are representing themselves as in need of support, particularly in need of support from the state, are women, usually single mothers, representing a large portion of those persons to whom Senator Springer was just speaking of, families where children need to be nurtured and provided with a safe haven. Children, of course. Oftentimes also we see the homeless and those that have been displaced by circumstances which have taken place around them. Persons with disabilities. That's an important demographic group that we also have to ensure that adequate housing is provided for them. Having said all of that in an international context, and Barbados having subscribed to the principles contained therein, Mr. President, we then undertook over many years in this country to engage in discussions and exercises just like this, where we have vested lands in the Crown for the purpose of developing housing, specifically in this instance for low-income groups. And those low-income groups speak specifically to adequate housing that treats the affordability. Housing that meets the needs of those who are in the demographic group for which they are intended. And so over the years, certainly under the Barbados Labour Party administration in the past, we've had a best practice example of which we speak very often. The London-born towers in the city is a classic example. Then, former minister at the time would have created what would have been a flagship initiative, a transformational initiative. And I was speaking with the former minister at the time, last Friday, we were at the same function, and she was saying to me that it was one of the few housing developments that met some of these criteria that we're talking about here today. There was a crash facility being provided for women who were usually single mothers who needed to be able to go off to work, earn a living, support their families, but yet have safe haven for their children. Social facilities were provided. Play facilities were provided. And of course, it was central and in the city of Bridgetown. So this is an important principle when we engage in exercises like these where we vest land, where we not only create housing, but we create housing that is actually affordable to those for whom they're intended. So we went from a London-born towers under Barbados Labour Party administration to having instances where housing development in subsequent years also aimed at the same demographic, also aimed at low-income earners, also meeting the same needs of adequate housing, including the provision of social services, found themselves priced well out of the reach of the demographic for whom they were intended, found themselves immersed and embedded in corrupt practices, found themselves in a situation where persons were designated to live in given houses and then were unable to actually access them. There is no low-income person in Barbados that typically would look at a $450,000 price tag on a 650 square foot apartment and think that that is low-income housing. It's not normal. That's not affordability. And so I want to say here, Mr. President, that this is an important debate, but the execution of it is also important for the people of Barbados. In the last decade, we also saw a number of housing developments that at best I can describe as disrespectful to the ambitions and hopes and dreams of Barbadians. Why? Because there were doll houses on little patchwork plots of land. They did not say to us that we grew up in a nation where in tenantries and villages all over this nation, generations like the ones that Senator Greenwich was talking about would have come up in these small neighborhoods, had land passed down from a grandmother to a father, and from a father to a son, and from a son to a daughter. And they, the poor, low-income people of this country, would have worked their way up. They never went to the banks to access credit in many instances. They added on a room here. They added on a room there. They painted there. They added on a bathroom. They put they subdivided the lot and applied for permission and created another property for a grandchild. And so they built up communities around the tenantries and villages of this nation because they were given an opportunity under the Freehold Tenantries Act to be able to access affordable but also aspirational housing in this country of their birth. That is what these exercises need to be able to enable. And so we must never go back to a place where these dolly houses represent what we consider to be low-income housing. We must never go back to a place where we come to this place and we vest lands in the crown, and then we take those lands and say to Barbadian nationals, take that. Whatever we give you, you must take. We must never come to that place, Mr. President. Not only did we find ourselves in that space, but worse yet, we're now in a position where if we drive by our highways, down Highway 2A, for example, in St. Philip, for example, in many of these neighborhoods, the majority of these houses are overrun by brush. They are left to run to ruin, and ordinary Barbadians are still unable to access housing. And every other week we look at our newspaper and we can see a single mother, a displaced person, somebody who needs housing, and we are being told there is no housing. That cannot be the standard of our Barbados, Mr. President. And so I want to say here today that the government of Barbados, led by this administration, has a responsibility to ensure that the best practice example that we started with London-born towers and every other development in this country, which fed not only the right to Barbadians for adequate housing, but also the aspirations and dreams of Barbadians for housing that evolved along with them and their dreams as they grew, must be facilitated. But I want to have a flip side of this, Mr. President. There is something called the Global Strategy for Shelter. It was adopted in 2000 and it started to be implemented under the Universal Declaration somewhere back in 1988. And under this Global Strategy for Shelter, it recognizes the responsibility of governments to ensure that there is adequate housing. But it also does not expect that government is going to be the be-all and the end-all of the entire housing stock of a nation. It expects that government is going to serve as an enabler, and government is going to work with its private sector and its development partners to be able to ensure that you develop the housing stock over time. And that housing stock over time, Mr. President, must go to low-income housing, middle-income housing, but it must always at all times feed the dreams and the legitimate ambitions of the people of Barbados. That comes with an obligation on behalf of the people of Barbados. We are seeing in each of these incarnations, in many of these instances with these housing developments, that the arrears due to government for payment of either rent or ownership in these properties is too high. I want to take this opportunity to call on Barbadians also to meet the government step by step, walk hand in hand with the government. We acknowledge that this is a responsibility that the government owns. We accept that we have signed on to international conventions which say that you have a right to adequate housing, and as part of the global strategy, the government of Barbados in subsequent incarnations has also agreed at all times that we will work as an enabler with the private sector without the corruption that typically that we have seen going on in some instances to provide adequate housing to our people. But our people have to be able to work with us. When there is a problem, let's deal with it. Let's not find ourselves in a situation where we are constantly dealing with high levels of arrears for government housing. I want to call on our people to work with us. I want to call on our people, especially in this moment in history, to avoid putting further pressure on the state by having the state meet you halfway, beyond halfway, by making sure that there's adequate housing, taking these lands, ensuring that there's social facilities, ensuring that communities and social services are built up all around them that allow for employment, childcare, and all of these things, and at a price point which people can afford. And then we turn around and allow the arrears to run up. And when things happen, because there is also a consequence of arrears, then we will see the result in the front page of the newspaper. We have to be able to function as a community. And I want to call on Barbadians. I'm looking forward to the government being able to develop these new tracts of land that are being developed in these two communities on the south and the north coast of the island to ensure that Barbadians have adequate housing. And with those words, Mr. President, I am supportive of these two bills. I'm looking forward to us having more instances like this where we are providing adequate housing for Barbadians, and that Barbadians are equally so working along with the government as the enabler. With those words, I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Senator Wiggins. Thank you, Senator Wiggins. I next recognize you.
Before the government came into really housing and real estate, as we would put it, people, vendors, as we would call them then, you know, they're calling everybody entrepreneurs now, but vendors used to sell around schools. And I remember I went to St. Matthews, so letting everybody know I'm a proud St. Matthews person. Heart and soul of someone's constituency. And you would see vendors around there selling around the schools, and they live like in Bibby's Lane and Lear's Gap and so on. And those people would live in what we would call a shed roof and a kitchen. And those people sold from those trays and started from what we would say building around at the back, and started their houses and build around and build around. And their profits from those trays supported their children and helped them acquire a home. And because of education, which is a very positive thing, a lot of us have moved out of these districts and so on, and we want to own a piece of the rock. And a lot of us, on leaving school and getting our first job, would apply to the National Housing Corporation to get a house, as we would say. And I can tell you that I have applied to the National Housing Corporation and never heard a word from them after all of these years in terms of application for a house. Maybe I wasn't politically connected, so I didn't get one. So I'm saying that the government has now gotten into, building houses for people. And our senator here, she alluded to London-born apartments, and I have that in my notes as well. That's why I smile. And that is a good model, and it's a good model in the sense of those of us who go to Britain and so on would know that when these houses are built, these high-rise houses to accommodate different families, you have businesses at the bottom of the houses. So you can rent out the houses to the tenants, and then these tenants can in turn have a business going on at the bottom of the house, and it's like that practically in the whole of Europe. So some of these models we can take and, actually make them a little better in terms of what we want for our people. The other thing in relation to housing, and obviously it is rearing its ugly head now, is that, and for many years, that you would have rented housing. The government would have invested a great deal of money in building houses, and tenants refused to pay their rents. And by refusing to pay the rents, the government was not able to have those funds revolving to essentially repairs and maintenance and also new housing. And on the question of repairs and maintenance, I would think that when you spend a great deal of money on assets like real estate, there must be a maintenance program in place, a very serious maintenance program, because not only the houses, it's the government buildings, it is the schools, and it is these same national housing units, as we call them, that fall into a serious state of disrepair simply because there is no preventative maintenance programs in place for all these buildings. I mean, you have a beautiful building there like the National Insurance Building. I remember when that building was open, and I just got back here, but I don't think any tenants are in there now. So I think that with housing and with any type of real estate that government wants to become involved with, that they have to look at maintenance, because you cannot be abandoning buildings after 10 years, after 15 years, after 20 years. Because when we ourselves go to the banks to acquire a mortgage, we have to look after the maintenance and repairs of these houses. You just cannot abandon the houses because they are in dire need of repair. I mean, that's like sunk costs. So I think that that is one of the programs that the government has to look at. And then it's also the question of filtering applications, because at Cloughs, this land is being acquired for low-income housing. And the question arises, how do you filter the applications for low-income housing? People come up with all types of formulae, and there was this controversial thing of means testing people for loans and that type of thing. But I do believe that when you look at low-income housing, you should set scales in terms of salary scales and sometimes employment. And I know of someone who didn't live in this jurisdiction, applied to NHC for a house. And the person said because they were a maid that they had qualified for low-income housing. But because when the currency was translated, they were making more than $5,000 Barbados dollars, and they were told that no, you cannot qualify for low-income housing, not because of your job title, but because of your salary scale. So I think that sometimes we have to look at the two things. Because the person is classified as a maid and making more than 5,000 Barbados dollars, that they thought that they should be eligible for low-income housing. The other question in terms, though, Mr. President, of land acquisition is the whole question of the compensation of landowners. And there are many people who the government, successive governments, would have acquired the lands, and persons are still waiting many years later to be paid some money by the government for the acquisition of their lands. Also, it's the whole question that these things are being bandied about for a long time. It's the whole question of like building codes. Building codes. Because when you, as a normal individual, when you're building a house, you apply to town planning for permission and Ministry of Health and all the services that you would need to get permission. And these houses, so we're wondering if when government itself gets involved in building, if they build to standards, if they build the houses to standards, because soon after, not only the standards, but obviously you have to do a lot of geological testings these days in terms of the foundations when you're building high-rise buildings. Because there is history in St. Lucie where there's a house that has disappeared in St. Lucie, that same St. Lucie. So when you are looking to acquire land anywhere, you should always look not only at the health services and so on, but I think that we should get involved in these geological testings to make sure that the foundations of the housings are adequate to accommodate, 5 stories, 6 stories, 10 stories, because we know that land in Barbados is running out, as they say, and I think that as Senator Greenwich has alluded to, he spoke some very good points when he alluded to the fact that many Barbadians who have returned home from the diaspora, buy homes, and now they have abandoned them for one reason or another, and simply because, and I know that what he was saying to be a fact, because a lot of the Barbadians, the second, well, let's say from third generation, practically, they're not interested in returning to Barbados. And that has caused a lot of the housing, to be dilapidated around the place. So I think a good point of reference that the government should do, I don't know because I don't work in land registry and I don't know anything about it, but they should really go around and have like a land registry, a land bank, and all the houses that are dilapidated and all the ones with all those for sale signs in St. Philip, for all those nationals. Some of them have not all died. A lot of them come back to Barbados and they think that our health services are not adequate, and they decide, you know what, I'm going back to Britain or Canada or the United States because I'm old now and I need to be taken care of. So I believe that there should be a mechanism in place whereby these people who are vacating their properties do not leave them there to become dilapidated, and then you can't really sell them. So I think that that's one of the things that the government, can set out to do in terms of this whole question of housing. And I think for St. Lucie, which is our most northern parish, to bring housing development to St. Lucie is a very good thing. It is a very good thing because when the housing development has started, then a shopping center would start, and then another, maybe the airport, another airport can be opened in St. Lucie. So the thing is that once the government has started such a project, when the government has started such a project, you have the domino effect, as it were, whereby a lot of development would start going to the northern part of the island. I think I saw in the newspapers recently a new restaurant in St. Lucie where they're saying it's like a hidden secret, as it were. But once the government gets this project going, I am positive that even private real estate developers would start to invest in St. Lucie because it's the most northerly parish. It's a very beautiful parish, lot of very virgin land, and it's a place where visitors obviously would be able to come and even invest. And a lot of Barbadians, again, Senator Springer spoke about St. Andrew. Yes, there's a large contingent of people in St. Andrew, from St. Andrew, living in Reading. So those parishes, when you start with housing development, and you put in the complementary services like the daycare centers and the shopping centers, and people would say, you know what, we don't have to be in congested Warrens and we don't have to be in congested Bridgetown. But the interesting thing is that as soon as the government itself starts low-income housing, because there's a lot of land in St. Lucie, a lot of empty spots in St. Lucie, you would find then that the private developers would follow, and then land becomes very expensive. So this is a great project to start with, that people, as Senator Springer alluded to, when you first want to get your first house, or you want to get a property close to where you grew up, because I was hoping to get some property in the turning, as we put it, because I born in the turning, you know? So, and that is the, you know, that is the type of romanticism you attach to housing. So, with those few words, Mr. President, sir, I do support this bill, and I do hope that it will be a very successful project, and it's a good beginning for the residents of St. Lucie. I thank you, sir. I'm obliged.
President, please proceed, sir.
Thank you. I have no intention of speaking on this resolution, but I've heard senators speak, and I just wanted to clarify some things for them.
Yes, because I was just about to ask you then, where are you standing?
No, but I still want to clarify some things, just to clarify a few things. Senator Gwyneth in particular, even though he wasn't speaking on this resolution, he made mention of some derelict houses, and I recall, you know, I've always been a lot of things. So I recall in the Housing Act itself, that there's provision for the National Housing Corporation to move in. And so first of all, they have to serve a notice on the owner of this property, these derelict properties, if they're unfit for human habitation or their nuisances and stuff. They can, not the National Housing Corporation under Section 11 of the Housing Act. The National Housing Corporation can move in and force people to clean up their properties, and if they don't do that, they can even demolish them and sell the property to recover their costs. So but we are asking for is already there. The problem is that we don't do it. The Ministry of Health also has provisions that they can deal with derelict houses and stuff, but nobody does it. And these derelict houses, if you ever live in a neighborhood with one of them, you would know that the rats take over. And then you were hearing about leptospirosis and all kind of stuff, leptospirosis. And you wonder what's happening. It's happening from a lot of these derelict homes. Then also some of these derelict homes become places of residence for what we call paroles. Right now next to my office there is a school, former school, the Lucie School. It is very heavily tenanted. I don't think the government knows that because they don't use the normal entrance. They use a little hole in the wall and they're going there. I saw a fellow one there from my window taking in the stove. Now people will laugh, but he has to cook on something. But people live in these places and they're not maintaining them properly. They need to clean up that as well. I look from even at times to times. Sometimes the people use them as these ladies of the night use them as facilities to things. I work at night and I see them going in. I don't go, my dear. I able to know. But I can see, and then sometimes I'm on the bank holidays, I'm working, I can see the activity. I don't try to stop them. I feel the fellas having a little fun and there's no harm in anybody. But I think they need to do something about them. These houses and these schools that are abandoned have taken on other aspects. But I want to speak to the land acquisition process and what's been happening in this country. Government acquires a piece of land for housing development and they vest it in the National Housing Corporation. That process of vesting the land in the National Housing Corporation is to facilitate ease of transfer of the land, because if the government has to sell the land itself, they have to come to the House, they have to come to the Senate to effect that transfer, and it would be a very cumbersome thing because every piece of land that is sold will have to come here. So we use the National Housing Corporation as a way to get around the Crown vesting and disposal of assets. We just vest it one time in the National Housing, and National Housing then sells. The problem here is that depends on which party is in power, and like Senator Wiggins pointed out, if you are not aligned, you don't get a spot, even if you are deserving. But what I want to talk about really is when you do get a spot, they came up with some mechanisms where you have to use a particular contractor to build your house. They give you the spot and they tell you which house that you can build a house on it, but you have to choose a particular design and you have to choose one of the contractors that the government has designated the contractors for this particular project. I know of people who went forward to get houses, to get land, to build houses, and they have some of the skills they can use to build their own homes. But no, you have to use the contractors. I think that is corruption. We're talking a lot about corruption, but that is a way to get work for your friends. You put up a site and you tell the people, okay, you choose here and X contractor will build on lots 4, 6, 9, and 10. If you get number 10, then this contractor will build for you. You might not want him to build for you. You might not even like him. But you are forced to use that contractor or do not accept the property. Government has to rethink that. Because I know, and I can speak to it, my father was a carpenter sometimes, and a laborer sometimes, depending on what was available. And when, you had to build onto the shed roof, my father did it, sell a cow, and get some lumber and he built it on. Now, if he were living in one of these national housing areas, he had to use the contractors, if he bought land, in the national housing area, he has to use the contractor that the government is giving him. That would have been wrong. When he had the skills. So I think that government needs to fix that. The next thing I want to talk about, and I don't know if you might not be too pleased, but right now we're having some property development going on at Corverley to facilitate whatever is going on up there. I don't know yet. But I well remember when that property was up for sale back in the 90s. I was a member of the board of directors of Public Workers Credit Union. And we proposed to buy that piece of land and make it available to our members, because that was around the time when the Sanford administration was sending home people. And we wanted to empower some of our members who were going home. And we thought some people who wanted to get land, build homes, small farms and stuff. And that was a project. We even secured funding for this project. We had designs for the homes and all kind of stuff. And the government refused to sell it to the credit union. Talking about empowering poor black people. Instead, they give away the land, but not you. So don't start getting angry. They give away the land to someone else to build chicken coops. I think it was Senator Cummings that spoke about these chicken, these dolly houses. Because, you know, if you stand up between some of them and you stretch out your arms, you might touch both. You know, and that's nonsense about zero lot line, where you own nothing other than the house in which you occupy. You can't even put up a clothesline. I hope that this government is not so foolish and so disrespectful of the people of this country as to continue that nonsense. You know, because it is hurtful. And I saw in the newspapers where a lady having bought and occupied one of those overpriced chicken coops, it was leaking and she couldn't get it fixed. Had a lot of trouble. It was all in the newspaper. Most of you must have seen it. And of course it was on the Barbados Underground, place very frequent. And so I noticed a lot of what is happening in terms of these houses. But a government did that to the people of this country. Government should get out of the house building. I don't mind you providing lots. Find a piece of land like you're doing now. Put in the water, roads, and whatever, and the lights. And then leave the people to build in accordance with the standards set up by the town planning department. Because you cannot, if you say, well, okay, I've given you a house spot, but you can't go and build a chicken coop on it, or a house has to have a particular value if you want to put it on this property. I think those should be the restrictions. You can't go and put something like 4 poles in a shed and put galvanized around and say, I'm going to live in there, because it will bring down the value of the other people's property. But government should not be building the homes. We have too many people who can build now. There's no shortage of builders in this country. And we certainly should not be forcing people to choose the builders that we want to empower, to give them some money. That is what concerns me most about what is happening in when government set about this business of housing every last, what do they call them? So every last, let's call it housing every last person or something, this health program. You remember that program? I think you weren't empowered then, but that housing every last person, or whatever they call it. If you go to, I think just before you get to Orange Hill, and there's someone in St. Philip, those houses are small. I don't think if you have, they're pretty nice and that, but if you have a double bed, don't move it. Sell it and go and find a little bed to put in that house. Too small. People trying to get into them and had a fridge had to take off the doors. They were not built for, they were built for, I don't know who they were built for, because no Barbadian should want to be housed like that in the 21st century. But they build a lot of them, and a lot of people make a lot of money off of them, and they don't have a lot of people occupying them. I don't know the best thing to do would be to push them down and start over. I don't know if government don't got a lot of money to do a lot of things, but certainly these lots are too small. So even if you try to expand some of them, you're going to be in violation of town planning because you got to build 6 feet from the boundary and all kind of stuff, or sorry, I'm told, can't make it. So I want this administration to learn, I can't even say from the mistakes of the last one, because they weren't mistakes, that was corruption. It was a mistake. They knew what they were doing. But I want you to learn from the excesses of the last administration in providing homes for the people of this country. What they were doing and what they did was wrong, and any right-thinking person in this country should acknowledge that. Even they should acknowledge it. They were just building and building and building and building without any regard, and they were building overpriced homes, and Senator Cummings call them chicken coops, overpriced or dolly houses. You know, they were small, they are small, and they're not fit for the purpose. I am sure none of the persons who were responsible either for designing them or for commissioning them would want to live in any of them. None. I don't think some of them should be sentenced to live, you know, in the United States some years ago, there was this lady who had some homes, apartments, and one thing she had to do as a part of the courts to live in one of them. I think we should do something like that to these people here to show them what they were doing to people. They're fair. They live in these fantastic houses and put people that they think they care about, that they are vowed to represent, they swear to represent, they come in here and hold the Bible to represent, and then turn around and do this to them. You know, it isn't fair. We got too much of that going on in this country, and we need cleaning up. I hear a lot. Yesterday I was listening to the news and stuff, and I heard a lot of people in the other place talk about people getting locked up and all kind of stuff. Well, I want locking up, but we're doing housing too. You know? I well remember against Senator, you would recall, Springer, that there was some land in your area. It was valued at it is $70-something a square foot, and it was so $65 a square foot, and I was trying to sell at $35. You know, the National Housing Corporation should not be in the business of providing cheap land for the people who are already empowered. But we did that, and I was doing some reading recently, and I discovered that in Belize, there was a case where a government minister approved the sale of land, which was to himself, at a price that was below the market value. And the Caribbean Court of Justice frowned on that, and I think they had to pay back some of this money. I think we can go that route. We have to stop this because we gave away that land, you know. And we have a restaurant on that property, you know. And I remember the former minister defending when it was discussing this in the other place recently. He came out and put his foot in his mouth by saying that they were empowering poor people. I don't know if poor people can build a restaurant of that size and, you know, quality. That wasn't for poor people. It was corruption. We have too much corruption going on in this place. It is not only, it is, you know, the thing is, this corruption that we are having, this government has vowed to do something about it. But I am only hearing words. Until such time as I see a fella in handcuffs then you will have my unwavering support. But I feel that it's just talk for the masses. And when I see something happening, you know, when I see something happening, then I will say, good job. And I will be happy to applaud you on it. But you got to do something about it, man. Too much of it. Too much of it going on or went on. Went on in housing, it went on in every aspect of our society. But we are just talking and not doing anything about it. Mr. President, I am forced to call the government bluff. I want to see them doing something about what they're talking about in the other place, and not only giving the people of this country false promises. A lot of people going home in this country, and if the government coffers had the money that was stolen, we wouldn't be seeing 1,500 to 2,000 people going home and expecting more. Mind you, these 1,500 people are going home won't be able to buy none of these houses in St. Lucie. But we need to do something about it, Mr. President. We need to stop talking and do some actions. I said it wasn't going to be long, and I think I covered most of the notes that I had here. Yes, I covered everything. So, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Any other speaker before Senator Moore proceeds to wind up the debate? Please, Senator Moore.
Mr. President, I've heard all of the honorable senators speaking on the housing matter. I can assure those people who seem concerned about corruption and contractors and zero boundary lines and the like and all sorts of other things, that this government has time and time again been extremely transparent in our processes. We have had town planning consultations so that in order to have town planning reforms, that Barbadians had an opportunity to give their input and to hear what some of the suggestions would be going forward with regard to the town planning aspects of our country. Most people, or some people, may not see it that way, but we believe transparency is the best policy. And as a result, we have been very careful to ensure that all Barbadians, if they so desire, can be a part of the process and the decision-making going forward for the betterment of our country. We certainly don't frequent any underground sites or underground locations. We are totally above ground because we are above board. So I can certainly say for myself, I don't frequent any underground sites and locations. And as far as ensuring that all Barbadians have equal opportunities within our ability to provide housing to Barbadians, we will always endeavor to do so. Bearing in mind there are no perfect solutions, there are no perfect situations, but we always endeavor to do what we know is in the best interest of this country. I would just let it conclude and say that I want to thank all senators for supporting this resolution, and I would now like Mr. President to move that the resolution be now passed. Mr. President, I rise to lead.
Order number 3, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve in accordance with Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of the parcel of land, the property of the Crown, situate at Chancery Lane in the parish of Christchurch in this island, for the public purpose of housing development.
Mr. President, I rise to lead off the debate on the vesting of lands at Chancery Lane in the parish of Christchurch. These lands are just under 143,000 square meters, and once again, the purpose of the lands is for housing development. The parcel of land is part of the Ferry Valley Plantation in Christchurch, and it was acquired by conveyance. We are seeking to have this parcel vested in the National Housing Corporation for additional housing for Barbadians. The land is abutting and bounding lots of the Long Beach estate and a public road which leads to the Long Beach Resort in one direction and to Elam Park and the Long Beach estates in the other. Mr. President, housing. Mr. President, land and housing empowers Barbadians, and we are cognizant that people need to be empowered. When someone has their own house or their own land, they're able to use it for all sorts of purposes. When they go and get a mortgage, it gives them equity, and as time goes on, they can use this equity to further themselves and to also enhance their existence and that of their families. Oftentimes, people use their houses or lands for the purpose of loans for things like education. We see that all the time. And that's been a long-standing Barbadian tradition where people will use what they own in order to further the education of their children or their grandchildren. People also, when they own their own property, they tend to treat to their environment and surroundings differently. When one owns their own home or their own piece of land, they tend to improve it. And those improvements come in many ways. Not only in terms of building a structure, which then keeps the lands and the environment in a particular condition, but they tend to have a whole beautification of their environment. We all know when we drive around and we see people in their own gardens, and one thing I'd say about Barbados, which I find to be quite unique in Barbados as opposed to many of our neighbors, we see people like to plant things. They plant flowering plants. Some of them use whatever small areas they have for purposes of vegetables and food, other food items, which we all know is something that is much desired. And so we believe that this, once again, use of trying to empower Barbadians into having access to their own home is a good thing. It also allows people to have something. You know, all Barbadians like to, we work hard and do things in order to leave something for your children and your grandchildren. And certainly land and housing is something that Barbadians traditionally have over the years used, Mr. President, and made sure that the next generations to come have something that we can leave for them. You know, in Bajan parlance, we've always said land don't spoil. And it's true. Land is always, and housing is always a good investment for Barbadians. And we know that. I mean, sometimes when you're younger, you're not always as cognizant as what good investments are. But certainly, I think most Barbadians' desire is to own their own home. It is a dream of most Barbadians to own their own home, Mr. President. So we believe that these lands here in Chancery Lane will once again provide Barbadians with their dreams and their desires to own their own homes as a chance once again to empower them. And finally, Mr. President, I just want to say that we know Barbadians want their own places. There's an issue that has seemed to permeate in recent times, which is the issue of squatting. And the reason why people squat is an issue like this and other issues. And it's the responsibility of responsible governments to ensure that as many people that can have the opportunity to own their own home or their own piece of land are given that chance. And so once again, Mr. President, we're looking to have the lands here at Chancery Lane vested in the National Housing Corporation to provide solutions to the Barbadian housing situation. I beg to move that this resolution be now passed. Mr. President, I now beg to move that this sitting be suspended for lunch until 2:30.
The question is that this sitting be now suspended until 2:30. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. We now stand suspended until 2:30.
Which one of y'all know? Huh? This Franklin? Yeah. You get it? Yeah, I'm in for that. Elaborate, but the mute